It's a nasty, predictable, and all too enduring myth of progressivism that Americans who lived before the advent of the public school system were somehow poorly educated rubes. But without nasty progressive myths, there would be no reason at all to keep sending your kids to failed public schools in the first place, would there? I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the In Your Face Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that gives you the straight skinny on what's going on in classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we're going to examine the myth, the glaring myth, that Americans were poorly educated before the introduction of Horace Mann's famed public school systems in the 1850s. So, from all throughout the colonial period through about 1850, Americans had no public schools. None, zero, zip. There's a reason why your founding fathers, may they rest in peace, made absolutely no stipulations in the founding documents that related to education on the part of the federal government. None, zero. And we know from history that anything not accrued to the federal government in the Constitution goes to the states. So for a long period of time, say 1609, was it, right? Jamestown, all the way through 1850, American children were educated by private educators. They were educated in the home. They were educated 1,000 ways that weren't public schools. And here's the thing. On average, they were a much more literate culture than ours is. The numbers going all the way back before 1850, only 4 in the colonial period, go back to the time of the Constitution, only 4 in 1,000 Americans in the 1780s was illiterate, where now the numbers are much higher.
And that's not you just picking a random number. That's actually a study that was conducted in 1800 by DuPont de Nemours. And that revealed that only 4 in 1,000 could not read or write. 4 in 1,000 could not. So, that is a myth that if we take a look at a education class I had to take, America's Education, we weren't, that part wasn't pointed out. That's the part that should have been pointed out, that we actually had a good education system where we had everyone being able to read and write. But we focused too much on the, everyone was bad and America's a horrible, no good place. If you take a look then into the 19th century, if we're moving forward here, Susan Alder in Education in America said that parents did not even consider that the civil government in any way had the responsibility or should assume the responsibility of providing for the education of children. Only one state, Massachusetts, even had compulsory schooling laws before the Civil War, yet literacy rates were among the highest in our history. And it's just kind of interesting because Massachusetts, John Adams, he believed everyone needed to be literate. So for them to be the one state that had any compulsory schooling laws makes sense to me.
Yeah, and you go back, and so back in the colonial period, the time of the founding fathers, literacy was really, really high. Now again, this was not what we would consider graduate school stuff. Oh. These people weren't educated to the point that they were brilliant, or the education hadn't saturated into some of the arcane subjects that we teach our kids. However, you look at what the average American who was doing day-to-day work, right? Mm-hmm. Who was working on carriages or fixing wagon wheels or churning butter or shipping things back and forth was remarkably literate vis-a-vis today. But the most highly intellectual people of the colonial period were incredibly educated. The intellectual achievements of colonial America were astounding, according to this article. Lawrence Kremen, Dean of American Education Historians, estimated the literacy rate of the period at between 80 and 90%. Ben Franklin taught himself 5 languages and was not thought unusual. Jefferson taught himself half a dozen languages, including Arabic. George Washington was unceasingly embarrassed by his lack of a formal education, and yet readers of his journals today marvel at his intellect. This was a guy who never formally went to school, but picked up what he knew through alternative methods of education. And when you read his speeches, he's absolutely brilliant, and his ability to write way, way, way above the writing of our college kids today.
And going back to my favorite, John Adams, yes, he had private tutoring, but he also was kind of like the opposite, where he became a farmer. So for people to say, well, that's only for those elitists, the ones who aren't, real workers, well, they actually did it all at that time. And think about Common Sense, the book, the pamphlet, Common Sense. Thomas Paine wrote that. T-Paine wrote that so that everyone could read it and understand it. And you have our college kids read that today, and they can't even understand it.
They can't do it. And it was nothing, as the article goes on to point out, it was nothing for a man, and in some cases even women, back then, to learn algebra, geometry, navigation, science, logic, grammar, history, entirely through self-education or with tutors. A seminarian, somebody going to be a priest or a minister, was usually required to know Greek, Hebrew, Latin, French, and German just to begin his studies. It's really remarkable. And much of this instruction would take place in a one-room classroom on a dirt floor.
Well, and that's the thing that I was going to bring up, too. Even into the 20th century, even halfway through the 20th century, there were still many in our rural areas, the one-room schoolhouses. And that's where all the kids would walk. Oh, my gosh. To walk to school, to get in one classroom with one teacher who knew you and knew what your level was, and that's where you would learn. It wasn't the top-down structure that we have now with the federal government.
As many, many, many more have pointed out, so this is not an original thought necessarily, is that America became a superpower on the backs of kids who learned in one-room schoolhouses. For the period from 1609 all the way through 1850, American educational aims and ambitions, America as a country was growing and burgeoning, everything about it, right? And this is not to say that initially the public schools did worse necessarily, but we see how, since the time of 1850, how the federal public schools have taken more and more power away from the states and local communities, have begun to indoctrinate more, and are unable now to give even basic literacy to many of our kids.
All right, moving on. I have a question for you. What do universities need more than students?
A swift kick in the pants.
That too, but they need more diversity directors. Yes. Campus Reform took a look at some universities who are hiring diversity administrators during the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the universities getting federal money for coronavirus aid is the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And they just hired a new Director of Diversity and Community Relations Officer, specifically for its business school. So it's not even like a university. It's okay, just for business school, we need more diversity and community relations. So the school explained that this new hire is important because this gentleman who was hired will provide strategic leadership in creating an integrated vision and shared responsibility for facilitating the college's diversity goals and for fostering and supporting a campus culture that respects and appreciates individual differences.
Blah. You hit it on the head, Katie. You don't need a business diversity czar. If you insist on playing identity politics, if you insist that that's important, have one person in charge of diversity services. Literally, you've got dozens and dozens. How many shows have we done over the last 2 years? What, like Michigan is like 90-something 90-something at the University of Michigan. Many of them making more than $100,000 a year. Ohio State, 80-something of them. The University of Texas, just huge numbers of people doing the same job again and again and again and again and again, and they're all being paid huge bits of money.
So they're all supposed to be diversity, so unique, and they're all the same.
They're all the same.
It's poetic.
It is, and I'll tell you, at my university now, one of the big problems is this is not just diversity administrators. One of the reasons the universities are in crisis is because we've spent so much money needlessly hiring administrators. I get that you think that college professors are overpaid, and honestly, given what we're turning out, it's hard to argue. I mean, given the garbage that your kids are getting, even I can't really argue with that. I would say simply, where is the real money being spent? Once you become a college administrator, you make a lot more money. There are far fewer college administrators than there are faculty, and collectively they make more money than the faculty does. And we had a just nauseating, we're on this listserv at my university, which means when everybody, my department talks to each other on email, I have to hear it. There's no way I can opt out of it. So there was this really just maudlin debate going on the last couple of weeks about how terrible it was that our funding's being cut, we're going to get furloughed, we're going to have to work the same number of hours and get no money. And we were lamenting this, right? It's the fault of this evil, wicked capitalist country. It's the fault of the Governor Walker, the former governor. It's everybody's fault. Nobody, not in this whole stupid string, nobody simply made the honest observation. Why are we trimming faculty when you could much more easily trim 80% of your administrators and save so much money that you wouldn't have to let any teaching people go. But again, tell that to the administrators. And my own department can't seem to recognize this because, it's their politics demands bogeymen, right? This is Trump's fault, it's Walker's fault, this is capitalism's fault. No, your own stupid liberal universities are hiring more and more ridiculously liberal administrators, particularly utterly unnecessary cohorts, if you go back to your Roman legion history, cohorts of diversity officers who give nothing new. They're unnecessary.
And you're the one department that could use the excuse that your heads are just buried in your books.
I thought you were going to say buried somewhere else.
Well, that's why you would get the books.
It would require a remarkably lithe spine to make it happen.
But we know that that's not the case. Anyway, so everyone knows University of Tennessee, Knoxville, the same one that just hired that man for his strategic leadership, is getting $19.25 million from the bailout money.
In other words, these are people who, when you bail them out, they immediately do more of what got them in this situation to begin with, right? This is progressivism. I've said it earlier in the segment. I said it yesterday. Over and over again, when progressives fail, give them more money, and they'll fail more remarkably, which requires more money, they'll tell you. Look at our public school systems. For the last 30 years, they have not been able to educate our kids correctly. And the answer is always give us more money. So we, like good moms and dads, we vote for these referendums. We pay more of our sales taxes, more of our property taxes to the schools every year. And what do? They turn around and build brand new wings on their buildings, or they upgrade all of their computer technology. Meanwhile, their kids still can't read. I don't care what button you push on a computer. Only in progressivism can you fail spectacularly, get bailed out for it, do exactly what made you fail before, and then have the temerity to ask for more money and get it.
That's actually quite true. One more quick example, because I have a whole slew, but we only got to a couple. Salem State University in Massachusetts hired a vice president for diversity and inclusion, and that university got $6.5 million. This is what the man said, who was hired, Sean Bennett. He says, while the COVID-19 crisis has placed intense strain on us all, the challenges present an opportunity to reflect on our broad commitments to inclusion and engagement.
Instead of reflecting on our commitments to inclusion, let's reflect on our commitment to economics. You can't be afforded. And if there were any justice in the world, Trump would look you in the eye and fire you.
On to our next story, and it looks like we're going back to Ohio. We were in Ohio yesterday. I guess we're going to return. In Ohio, union workers at Ohio University in Athens are laid off. So they're planning there's 140 union employees who were laid off, and they are planning to actually have more cuts to come. These 140 employees are all members of the AFSCME Local 1699 union. Those employees include custodians, culinary, maintenance staff. They're going to have their positions eliminated effective May 31st. And OU spokesperson Carly Leatherwood said in a statement that the first significant personnel reduction that OU has implemented so far since the pandemic began, that the majority of the institution's operational costs are in those employees, which require the university to make extremely difficult decisions regarding our workforce, including today's action.
Her name is Leatherwood?
Yeah, I know
was
you were going to.
I knew you were going to. Professor of sex and gender?
No, I knew you were going to.
Tell me she was a professor of sex.
She's a spokesperson.
Leatherwood. Okay, all right.
It's her name.
This is something that I've reflected on many times before, and I actually tell my students this. I said, look at your universities. Why is Marxism, socialism, why are these ridiculously ineffective ways of doing business? Why do you Marxism? The more you fail, the more you destroy, the more we commit to you. Why is one of the only places in America today where socialism is really taken seriously is the university? Well, look at it. You've got professors who come in, teach 2 or 3 times a week. And meanwhile, you've got people who vacuum the carpets and wash the boards and paint the buildings and make sure the heat and the cooler are pumping, people who bring in the food and cook it for you, people who cut the grass and clean the toilets. Nobody knows their name. They don't get tenure. They don't work for 6 years and then get tenure and can never be fired. It's these prima donna professors, of whom I am one, right? We don't know their names. The kids don't know their names. And when crisis hits, they're the first ones fired. They're the first ones laid off. Again, not the administrators. Because, We need all these administrators to oversee the laying off of everybody else, right? Right, and you see the problem here. And their salaries are so bloated anyway, when they get furloughed, it doesn't hurt near as much as when faculty are laid off. And it certainly doesn't hurt near as much as when the so-called unskilled labor are. It really is, and you think about it, that's the perfect socialist analogy. Why does socialism work on college campuses? Because we professors who are so Marxist, who are always whining about our salaries and how we need more money and the state should support us more, we socialists, when you take something away from us, we don't say, it's for the good of the struggle. We whine like little babies. We live in a circumstance that is already the Marxist super plan, isn't it? Where everybody else does the hard work, we get all the credit for it, we teach 2 or 3 times a week and go back to our computers and write things, where all these other people are feeling the pain a lot more, the ones who keep the building up. That's why Marxism is believed in college campuses, because if there's an environment in America that replicates socialist dysfunction, it's your universities.
That it is. Well, John Atkinson is the president of the 1699 Union, and he says he's frustrated, obviously, with this news. He said the layoffs are happening all over campus. They're laying off professors and keeping high-dollar administrators, as you noted. Some of those professors actually... I mean, I'm okay with these ones maybe being laid off. It looks like the gender and race studies professors are being affected because they're not diverse enough to keep their jobs. So there are 3 professors from gender and race studies who were notified that they are being laid off as well.
And by the way, did you notice in the news we laid off this math professor, we laid off this chemistry professor? No. Which are the ones that made the news? Which are the ones that were reported on nationally? Oh my God, they laid off 3 gender and race professors, and they get their own stories, they get their own bylines. That's the crisis, right? Not anybody else who got left off. You know their names now, right?
All right, well, Leatherwood, your favorite, is back.
Leatherwood.
She said that faculty salaries are the university's largest expense. The majority of the institution's operational costs are in its employees. Again, saying the same darn thing, which requires the university to make the cuts. Whatever. Back in May of 2018, Breitbart actually did a story on the vice president of diversity and inclusion at Ohio University, who made almost $200,000 a year, and that's in 2018.
That's 4 English professors right there. Literally 4 English professors at $250,000. And there's your socialist utopia, Leatherwood.
It's time for some real education with the Aeneid. Composed between 29 and 19 BC, the Aeneid is a Latin epic poem written by Virgil that tells the legendary story of Aeneas, a Trojan who traveled to Italy, where he became the ancestor of the Romans. The first 6 of the poem's 12 books tell the story of Aeneas' wanderings from Troy to Italy, and the poem's second half tells of the Trojans' ultimately victorious war upon the Latins. The Aeneid is widely regarded as Virgil's masterpiece and one of the greatest works of Roman literature.
It really is a shame that back before Common Core, our kids used to at least read in schools a little bit of the Iliad and probably the Odyssey, right? Those books were when I as a professor at university, English professor at university for 25 years, kids came to me and I knew they knew certain things. I knew they had a basic sense of what the Bible said, particularly the New Testament. They all had read at least the Odyssey. That's gone now. Common Core has utterly destroyed any cultural literacy that we had. In fact, what they read now is paragraphs and chapters of books. They don't read books. I literally have freshmen who tell me that they have never in their life read a whole... These kids have been in public school since they were 5. They've never read a book cover to cover. They're not asked to do it. And so it really is a shame that most Americans are a little bit familiar with Homer, but know nothing about Virgil. I believe that Virgil's epic, you've got the 2 great Homeric epics, right, of the ancient Greeks. You've got the Odyssey and the Iliad, 2 of the great books of Western culture. And then you've got the one great epic of Rome, the Aeneid, which almost nobody has read. It's a shame because I think it's a greater book. I think it's a greater epic than either the Odyssey and the Iliad. These are subjective, of course, but I believe that. And it was a more influential book because all throughout the Middle Ages, when the Rome had fallen, the Latin language remained. It became the language of the Roman Catholic Church. And so Latin was readable all through the Middle Ages, which means that medieval society was able to read the Aeneid. They had it. The Odyssey and the Iliad were more or less lost until the teaching of Greek late in the 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries. It would be almost 1,000 years after the fall of Rome before Western schools started teaching Greek again, and people were actually able to go back and read the Odyssey and the Iliad. So it's a much more influential book for the history of Western culture than the Odyssey and the Iliad. And again, it's a beautiful 12-volume, 12-book epic, but I can only give you a little bit of it. And take a look at our quote today. It's a great moment where Aeneas, our hero, he's been suffering, just like Odysseus, right? He's been, after the Trojan War, he gets knocked around for years. He has to travel all across the Mediterranean, facing all kinds of monsters, being sent to hell, just like Odysseus was, and having to come back from that. There's a great moment, though, after all that suffering, where Aeneas and his companion, they're looking for food, and they happen to come through the break in the bushes when they've been stranded in Libya. And they come across this new temple being built. It's gorgeous. The new queen, Dido, of this new community has built this beautiful temple. And he sees it, and it reminds him of civilization after all of the barbarism he had to deal with. And so he walks right up to the temple, and carved into the doors is the story of Aeneas' own life. It's beautiful. He sees his father, he sees himself and his departed wife, Creusa, who died in the fire. He sees his little boy. He sees his ships. He sees his city of Troy burnt to the ground, and he starts to weep. After all of his suffering and all of his travail, he sees himself and all he has suffered carved into the marble doors of this new city. And he turns and he says to his friend, "Here too, the honorable finds its due, and there are tears for passing things. Here too, things mortal touch the mind. Here too," this is the famous rerum lacrimae speech, the tears of things speech. It's a lot longer than that. If you get a chance to read the Aeneid, this is a great thing you could do, Mom and Dad, at home. Get a kid's version of the Aeneid, or get the Aeneid. You can get it free online, and go through some of it. It is beautiful and poignant, and that speech I just read you, the rerum lacrimae, the tears of things, boy, what a deep, profound message. Even here, there are tears for those things that human beings suffer.
And that's going to be your Wednesday. We made it through half the week. As always, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And if you have a question for our Friday Q&A, visit freedomproject.com/askduke or send us a message on social media. Now, we're going to wrap things up with our fun fact for the day. And although this is more kind of creepy and weird than pretty much fun, we're going to still talk about it. Did you know that of the 7 U.S. presidents who were born in Ohio, since we talked about Ohio, only one, Ulysses S. Grant, actually served 2 full terms. 3 of them actually died in office, Garfield, McKinley, and Harding. And you could actually say that 4 did if you include William Henry Harrison, since most of his adult life was spent in Ohio, and we know that he died after just a month in office. So kind of creepy, kind of fun, but go Ohio.
As somebody born in Ohio, I can only say, we don't give a damn for the whole state of Michigan, whole state of Michigan, whole state of Michigan. We don't give a damn for the whole state of Michigan. We're from Ohio. And that's going to do it for us this show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, my friends, go Buckeyes.